It's a huge privilege to work with you both, obviously, and it's a huge privilege to have you all here. I'm very proud and honored and most of all happy that we are having this third round of Innocracy, and it's hopefully the third of many more rounds to come. We'll talk more about this at the end of this conference day. I would very much like to use the next minutes to give you my perspective on this conference and explain to you, share with you why we chose the angles we chose to this very day. And I would like to start with what this day is not. So this day is not about the incremental reform of our system. We certainly do believe, and I guess we all share it, this belief in this room, that we need more incremental innovation, as well with regards to the political space and the economic space. It's necessary, no doubt. But I guess we also realize that this is not enough, which is why we decided to focus for the second time on democratic transformation today. That's a very conscious choice. Instead of asking how we can improve the given picture, this is what innovation does, we ask how we must reconfigure its frame, which is what transformation aims to do. So we will ask which new ground rules our societies need to be able to meet the existential challenges today and tomorrow bring. And we will ask how we can master the transformational challenges we are in as we speak. So this is about transformation and not innovation. That's the first important thing. The second thing, and I believe as importantly, today's conference does not ask if we need transformation, it asks how we master transformation. The times we live in make abundantly clear that we must rewrite some of the fundamental rules of democratic societies, most of all our economies. So we decided to focus on the how. How can we manage transformation? How can we master this? And we all know it's quite a challenge for our democracies to master this. So today we will take two perspectives, and I think this is quite uncommon, on this how of democratic transformation. We take an inner perspective and we take an outer perspective on this how. And I would like to use the next minutes to share with you why we did that. So we have two focus topics, two focus issues. Paulina, Dominic, you said it. It's sustainable democracy and digital democracy. And I would like to pick one of them, sustainable democracy and the climate crisis, this epic crisis of our time, to explain to you why we chose the inner and the outer perspective on this very day. So let me start with the outer perspective on the how of transformation. Those of you who were here last year already, we saw a couple of people who stood up, may remember that in my last year's keynote I very much highlighted that Western democracies stand on a very ambivalent heritage. On the one hand, we have a very worthy heritage of pluralism, the rule of law, the expansion of individual liberties, and many more things. That's something I believe can be proud of, and this is something we want to build on. But there's a flip side to the coin, right? We also have a very destructive heritage as Western democracies. Our societies rest on a model of systematic ecological and social exploitation for many decades and centuries already. We have a long history of cultivating a lifestyle as a global aristocracy, really. We externalize the negative cost of this lifestyle to others, to other parts of global society, to other species, and most importantly, to the future. And we're all realizing that this lifestyle is coming to an end, right? It's a lifestyle that roots, I believe, in a very misled understanding of liberty. The idea that we are at liberty to produce and consume entirely unrestricted. The notion that a free economy is only free if it has no boundaries, that only the market puts a cap on our extraction, on our exploitation, and on our emissions. And somehow, when you think about it, it's quite a sad irony of history that over the last decades, the democratic societies of the West managed to globalize and export this destructive model of leading a life But we did not manage to export the cultural liberalism we're also proud of, and which builds fundamental parts of our identity. Now, today, we're increasingly aware that this economic extremism we lived for so long now, we forcefully and successfully promoted for such a long time, caused the global climate crisis, right? It's the planet response to what we cultivated and invented in the first place. But we do not draw the consequences, at least I believe so. The situation we're in may be very dramatic, but our collective response to it doesn't really reflect that. Somehow, as Western societies, we manage to detach the knowledge we have, the clear insight we have, from action, from behavior, and most importantly, from political decision-making with regards to the parameters of our economy and of our politics. So we talk about the seriousness of the situation all the time. As you all know, the headlines these days are full of reports on climate change, and I think there's not a lack of alarmism. I think cognitively we all know what's going on. And yet today's democratic societies and our democratic institutions, the ones you mentioned, Dominic, treat the climate crisis as if it was just another policy issue, something we can deal with incrementally, which is quite strange when you think about it. It is as if we're in a collective state of hallucination, as if the ecosystem's dynamics assimilated to the pace of our political decision-making. That's a very weird notion, right? So to truly tackle this crisis, it's clear that we need new ground rules, new parameters for the economy and for society as a whole. Principles and rules that help us redefine our everyday environment in a more sustainable and just way. And sustainable and just, that belongs together. Sabrina Schulz, who's already here, will speak about that tonight. So to get there, we need bold ideas for radical reform, reforms that change the basic arrangements of our societies, reforms that fundamentally transform our structures, our institutions, our processes, our production, our consumption, but also our mindsets, our collective values and attitudes. And this must happen via the democratic decision-making process. Also, and I believe as importantly, we need practices for the way we organize the political process that leads to the ideation and implementation of these reforms. All too often today, and I know I'm one of many people who despair about this, meaningful political ideas remain unrealized or way below their potential because the way we organize the political process, as well when it comes to deliberation and as well as when it comes to decision-making, keeps us from finding and implementing the best solutions, which is a huge disaster. So this is what today's perspective on the outer half democratic transformation is about. It's about ideas for radical reform and a better way for creating and realizing these ideas. It's a perspective that asks about manifest changes in the structure of democratic societies and deep interventions into the economic and political fabric of our societies. Now, we all know that today's political realm is far from a transformational approach to the status quo. Politics, at least as I perceive it, is very much absorbed in incremental improvements within the given parameters. We really lack politicians who rise to the existential challenges we are in. This calls for us to discover, and I believe rediscover, the game-changing potential politics has. We need individuals and movements who are willing to aim high and who strive to positively and radically change this world. This is where we can learn from the nationalist populists all over the world, people who have a fairly clear vision of the world they aim to create, and who are convinced that they're capable of changing society. And that is a conviction I often miss on our side. We often despair that society cannot be changed and talk a lot about the things that are impossible, while the other side is in a full process of changing society full on. So the determination of nationalist populists is great, and I think it's a great threat, but it's also a constant reminder, which is quite precious. If we do not believe that this world can be changed to the better, if we do not create a positive vision of where this society is headed, we will remain stuck in a position where we act as defenders of the status quo. But this is by far not enough. Only if we take a very bold, transformative approach to doing politics will we regain ground we currently are losing to the right-wing nationalists. I believe that centrism must end, really. This is the era for politicians and for politics that empowers themselves to be a positive, transformational force for better democratic societies. And this, of course, leads us to the inner how, to the inner perspective on the how of transformation, our second perspective of this day. Because it comes for a reason, right? That we have such an incredibly hard time as democratic societies to change the default mode from the autopilot of incrementalism to a more transformative, fundamental approach to politics. The climate crisis challenges us, and I think that's so interesting about it. It challenges who we are, and it challenges how we see ourselves in this world. The climate crisis ultimately is a crisis that reminds us that everything is one, that every past and present action has systemic ripple effects that go beyond what we can grasp as humans. A crisis that makes us aware how we are part of a system so infinitely complex and so infinitely beautiful also. It's a system we will never be able to fix as societies. The only thing we can fix is ourselves, really, right? Our behavior, our laws, our ground rules as societies. All these human-made principles and boundaries that shape and steer our collective behavior and the way we understand ourselves within this greater context. Only this we can fix. Only this we can change. And yet, when I read the papers, today's democratic discourse does not mirror this insight. Instead, we ask how we can continue as we have with the life we have grown used to. How we can postpone and avoid fundamental structural changes to the way we live, produce, and consume. In doing so, Western societies continue a pattern from the past decades, carefully cultivated. Instead of boldly and decisively changing course, we continue a very sad history. We avoid structural responses to the climate crisis, and we offer half-hearted, isolated measures that aim to fix what we broke. It's still a very mechanistic approach to the situation we're in. And that's a huge mistake. I'm not telling you something new. We cannot transform our disastrous social and ecological footprint without transforming ourselves. We will only improve our situation if we understand this is not a climate crisis. Right? This is a crisis of human civilization, or more specifically, this is a crisis of a very specific model of living economically and politically. It's a crisis that is very intricately linked to who we are and how we live. And this is why I believe that the climate crisis is actually a very deep crisis of identity. The transformation of democratic societies is not primarily a policy issue, it's really a deeply human challenge, and I think this is why we find it so hard to actually change things. This is about how we relate to ourselves, to others, and to this world we are part of. It's a conversation about who we aim to be as societies in this world. So ultimately, when we say democratic transformation, which is quite a dry term somehow, right? I think we describe the challenge of cultivating a different kind of society, which sounds like it has more flesh to it. A society that is not deeply based in exploitation and destruction, one that lets go of its privileges, one that integrates itself within the boundaries of the ecosystem. And this is clearly, it's very uncomfortable, it's very existential, and no one really knows how to do it, how this is going to play along. Which is why so many people in Western societies place high hopes in technological innovation. The hope goes like this: if we manage to drastically reduce our ecological footprint with the help of technology, we could continue with the life we have learned to consider normal. And yet, when you pause and think about this idea, hoping for technological progress and the self-organized magic of the market to tackle the climate crisis seems so flawed. After all, it's only a linear continuation of the economic extremism that has brought us to this breaking point in the first place. And sometimes I wonder, have we ever really stopped and considered how strange and how deeply disturbing it is that collapsing oceans, the extinction of thousands of species, the existential stress of hundreds of thousands of fellow humans who are climate refugees, that all this isn't enough to make us pause, fundamentally reflect, and then really shift our position? Why do we put so much effort into creating innovations that enable us to continue with this insanity instead of trying to become more sane? What else, one wonders, must happen for us to fundamentally reconsider what we do? We are, after all, and I think this is important for me to say, we are at liberty to fundamentally change course. This is why we are democracies. We can do that. The economic system is human-made and thus can be reconfigured. So is the culture, the collective values, norms, and mindsets that serve as fundament and driver of this economic model. And not to forget, as democratic societies, we have the privilege to opt for a different direction. This is what we have our political self-organization for in the first place. So if we understand the climate crisis as a crisis of identity, it sheds light on why we avoid doing so. Fundamentally, this crisis of the ecosystem equals a challenge of unbecoming, I believe, of changing the deep structures of society and of finding values and worldviews that enable us to collectively reintegrate into the ecosystem's boundaries and global society. And doing so obviously requires a different kind of introspection and reflection. I hope this day is part of that. And it's a process that starts with relating in different ways to ourselves and to each other. And I hope this day is also part of that. So this, long words, short statement, this is really why we opted for the inner perspective on this how. We believe it's really important to look on the collective and individual inside, because this is really what hinders us to realize this outer how of transformation. This is like the fundament we have to build on, and we have to carefully recultivate. Now, I could do the same thing with regards to the digital revolution and digital democracy, but I will spare you that. I hope you get the idea of the two perspectives, and I hope you understand why we chose to opt for these two perspectives and really try to push them into the political discourse in Germany and Europe.